Good morning, everybody. Welcome to First Congregational Church's online service. My name is Dr. Tom. Welcome to my office. I am on my cozy couch today, and we are in the middle of our October series called Relentless Grace. Actually, it's not the middle, it's the last one. And this series is a reminder that grace is not some fluffy word that we hand out to those who can't handle real life. As we said last week, grace is tough. It has gritty dirt under its nails from being so active in the soil of our lives. Grace tenaciously pursues us without relenting or resting or giving up, and it tears down all the illusions about ourselves. Grace gets to the truth of our actual person, an identity, and who we are, and not merely the presentation of ourselves, because that's what love does. Grace loves the real us, not some false version or an idealized version that we've made up or pretend to be. It's not some impersonation of who we think we ought to be. Grace loves us just as we are. And when our illusions and facades about who we think we are fall apart and we're sitting in the rubble of our life, it's hard to believe it, but that is grace. As one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Thomas Merton, who happens to be my homeboy, once said, "It is not humility to insist on being someone that you are not. It is as much as saying that you know better than God who you are and who you ought to be." And then he asked the question, how do you expect to arrive at the end of your own journey if you take the road to another person's city? How do you expect to reach your own perfection by leading somebody else's life? Their sanctity and holiness can never be yours. You must have humility to work out your own salvation in that darkness where you are absolutely alone. Well, dang, Merton, doesn't sound like grace, does it? It sounds a little bit hard and difficult and harsh, and that's why grace is not just a word handed out to weak people. It's for everybody. You see, pride is a root of fear and causes us to protect who we think we ought to be and out into the world, protect who we think we ought to be out in the world, hoping that somebody not only approves of it, but affirms it as real and true. But since this false version of ourselves is not real, it never happens. And then we feel the affirmation and approval that we're looking for, we feel like we never get it. So what do? We try harder. We project further. And we get caught in a feedback loop of monotonous futility, doing all these impersonations of who we think we ought to be and never finding out and expressing who we are. So today's message tackles the topic of pride and humility, and that's how it ties in with our grace topic here. It's a parable that Jesus tells his disciples, and it's out of Luke 18. Now, this section is a collection of traveling parables, like a best of playlist of Jesus' teaching, and it's all compiled together and it's put inside of the traveling narrative that takes place between chapters 9 and I think like 19 or somewhere there. Now, today's parable is a lot more well known than last week's, thank God, and is pretty straightforward in its meaning. And it starts right off with the audience. Jesus told them this story to certain folks who were persuaded of their own rightness. And he tells the story. 2 men ascended the temple to offer prayers. One a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee took a stand and prayed these words to himself. God, thank you that I am not like the rest of people. Extortioners, unjust, faithless folk, or even like that tax collector back there. I fast twice a week, and I give 1/10 of everything that I acquire. And then it switches gears and it says, but the tax collector took his stand from a distance, not lifting his eyes to heaven, striking his chest, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And then Jesus concludes, I tell you, this guy here went home justified, not the other. For those who lift themselves up will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be lifted. Okay, end of story. Very well-known parable. I think we've probably would say, I think I've heard that one before, as opposed to last week's when we didn't. So it seems a little bit like Captain Obvious, like, okay, I don't know a single person in my relationships that would have a problem with this teaching. There's this prideful Pharisee jerk, and then there's this humble tax collector. And of course, this all makes sense to us. It's just universal that humility is this great virtue. Even the Greeks of Jesus' day knew this. So why emphasize it? That's a good question, right? Perhaps this teaching on humility and pride needs to be repeated and driven deeper into our souls, because we can easily convince ourselves that we are humble. And as Merton said concerning pride, the sickness is most dangerous when it succeeds in looking like humility. When a proud person thinks that they are humble, their case is hopeless. Well, dang, Merton, you just hit me with two hard ones in one blow here. But with God, all things are possible. So let's dive in with some courage. See you in a minute. Now, when I was in college taking all of the theology classes that I had to take, I noticed a pattern. The teacher would present like 4 views on a certain theology and then teach all the underpinning verses and histories and contexts and all that kind of stuff for all of 4 of the views. And then the students, who oftentimes had no idea that there was more than one view, which is a problem in itself, would then latch on to one of those perspectives as a favored one. And then in the hallways after class, they'd be arguing with one another on why their perspective was better than the other's perspective. And I would walk by and I was just like, bro, you literally just found this out 5 minutes ago. And now you're the expert arguing in the hallway. I can't understand this. And this happens all over the place. And you can see it on social media when people all of a sudden become experts on politics or economics or history or science or medicine and religion. And they're arguing things that they don't understand with infographics that are skewed to favor their one side. Now, Jesus has something to say about this. This first line of the parable declares the parable's intent is just gold. It's like solid gold. Jesus told this parable to certain folks who were persuaded that they were right and viewed others with contempt. Okay. That's like everybody. This is not merely a religious problem, but this seems to be the human problem we all face. We tend to look down on people who are not like us, who don't believe like us, who have different values than us, who have different cultural upbringings than us, who have, different political views than us, who are different ages, education, job, sports affiliations, countries, cities, careers, like you name it, and we can create a disdain loop with it, right? Oh, you're one of those people. And if you've ever thought that, and we all have, now this parable is supposed to hit us directly in the forehead with this. Now, we don't have time to address all of the ways that the pride can affect all of life, but for our purposes here, we can hone on what it looks like religiously. Now, I made a little bit of a math formula, and I'm not a math super person, but here's the formula. We don't know, then we know, and then how do all those idiots out there not know this? Right? Have you ever noticed that pattern? We know, we don't know, we don't know, then we know, and then all those idiots out there, I can't believe they don't understand this. That is the pattern that seems to be that is the heart of fundamentalism. Now, if you're thinking fundamentalism is not a set of beliefs, like written out on paper, but it's how one holds those beliefs, weaponizes those beliefs, and then insulates themselves with infallibility with their beliefs. That is fundamentalism. And that itself creates pride. And pride is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life. Okay? Why is pride the greatest enemy of the spiritual life? Because when you think you have arrived, you cease journeying. When you think you have the answers, you cease asking questions. When this happens, then you stop transforming, and then you get stuck where you are because you set up camp. And then this happens especially about the big questions. We really stop. Like, who is God? Who am I? Where's this all going? Like, if we think we got those bases totally covered and we take this infinite mystery that is called our faith in God and the universe and we reduce it to a propositional statement used as a weapon on those who just don't get it, then we live our lives inside of our heads and scoff at all those who don't see things like we do. And all of that is an illusion. We create like imaginary selves that exist in our minds and need to then be protected. And we make all these faces at ourselves in a mirror and think that our experience of that reflection is actually an experience of us, and it's not. Humility, however, is a curious mind, an open mind, an exploring mind. It has nothing to prove and nothing to earn and nothing to win. A humble mind is open and curious and exploring. And Thomas Merton said this: in humility is the greatest freedom. As long as you think you have to defend the imaginary self that you think is important, you lose a piece of your heart. As soon as you compare that shadow with the shadows of other people out there, hey, Facebook, I'm talking to you, you lose all joy. Because you have begun to trade in unrealities. And there is no joy in things that do not exist. This here is the spiritual battle we all face. To discover who we are in God and then express it in the world. And it takes great humility. And it also takes great curiosity. And much discipline and dedication to doing so. Where does this go next? Let's check that out. Now, if you're thinking like, dang, this is really hard. Well, the teachings of Jesus are supposed to be difficult for religious folks to hear, especially Luke's teachings, because what Luke is doing, he's dismantling the religious elite structure that we built and allowing anybody to enter in. Okay, think of Luke's continuing story in the book of Acts and how disruptive the message was to both Hebrew and Greek worldviews. Like if you read the book of Acts, it even disrupted the leaders of Christianity itself in those early chapters, because it dismantles the hierarchy that we build, which dictates who has value and acceptance. Now, we always organize ourselves socially. It's going to happen, and that is fine because we need to have some kind of structure in order. But what quickly begins to happen when we organize ourselves in a hierarchy, who's in charge of this and who's in charge of that and who's working and whatever, it quickly begins to dictate value, and then there's an accumulation of power, and then we have lost its intent of organizing ourselves and it becomes oppressive and abusive. Now, parables like this one like to compare polarities to make a point. And today we have a great polarity, a Pharisee and a tax collector. In modern day, I was trying to think like, what would Jesus have used in modern day? Like a bishop and a slumlord, right? Like, okay, a priest and a bookie. It sounds like the start of an inappropriate joke, if you ask me. And the hearers of this parable actually may have thought so too. You can't get a more polarized pair than the one that is the highest, most respected religious position in the land and the lowest, most despised position, tax collector. They were like collaborators with the hated Roman government. They were unclean religiously because they handled money with Caesar's image on it. They cheated their Hebrew neighbors out of their hard-earned income. And they brought social shame upon their families. Oftentimes they're excommunicated. Now, both of these individuals have ascended the mountain to the temple. Now, this language should get us to think of something. Maybe Psalms. Maybe Psalm 24 comes to mind. Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who may stand in his holy place? Those who have clean hands and a pure heart, those who have not lifted up their soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully. They shall receive blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from God, from the God of their salvation. Psalm 24, that's pretty well known. And this is literally happening in this parable. Two men are ascending the hill of the Lord, and both are described as standing. It uses that verb twice on purpose. So they are actually illustrating this psalm. Okay, surely the tax collector will be struck by lightning, and the Pharisee will sing, "How great thou art," with tears running down his face, right? Like that's what we expect to hear. I'm sure that's what the folks listening to this parable expected to hear, but a surprise happens. The Pharisee does not pray to God. As Thomas Merton says the Pharisee actually just makes religious faces at himself in the mirror and thinks his experience of himself is an experience of God. And the Greek actually says he prays to himself or by himself, saying these words, "Thank you that I'm not like other people." Have you ever said that, thought that? Yeah, guilty. Same here. Thank you that I'm not like other people, unjust and unfaithful extortioners like that guy behind me. I fast twice a week. I give tithes to this temple. Now, it actually doesn't say the Pharisee is a bad guy. He's an upstanding person in the community. He's active in the temple. He's educated in religion. He has an active spirituality. Like maybe in modern terms, he'd be the one on his knees, arms raised with tears streaking down his face every Sunday, trying his best to maintain the image of serious Christ follower. Like that's this guy. He's just your standard guy. But what Jesus is trying to communicate is it's all slavery. You stop doing that, and then someone asks, well, what's wrong with your faith? You used to be the one down here holding your hands up. You used to be so on fire. You used to be so excited. What's happened to you? And it's all slavery because it's about image management. So you have to keep it up. You have to keep your image clean. You got to keep your image pure. You got to do all this PR work for your own self. And Thomas Merton goes on to say, humble people can do great things with uncommon perfection because they're no longer concerned about their own interests and their own reputation. And therefore, they no longer need to waste their efforts in defending them. Dang, Merton, hit me between the eyes today. Now, how much energy is spent on our own PR that could be converted to spiritual energy spent on creativity and justice and community? That's the question we're supposed to be asking right now. Now, there's one more section, so we're going to explore that next. Okay, years ago, I was a turkey hunter. Don't judge. All right, don't judge. I had permission to hunt on 45 acres of land that was adjacent to 110 acres of land. Okay, turns out the turkeys were all on that 110 acre adjacent lot, and we had to lure them onto the property that we had permission to hunt. And the guide I was with, Steve, he warned me, do not step foot on that other property, because that owner of that property was very protective, and he monitored his borders during the season with binoculars and was even known for taking shots with his rifle at trespassers. So I wasn't about to cross that line. Now, in our story today, there are lines that the tax collector cannot cross as well. And it makes a difference in the interpretation of this parable. And I didn't see it until I jumped in just today. Now, the prayer and posture of the tax collector is very important. It's very different than the Pharisee. It says the tax collector stays back. Why? Is it just because he doesn't feel worthy to step forward? Maybe it's because he knows the psalm that he can't enter God's holy hill. His hands are certainly not clean from all the extortion he's committed. His heart is definitely not clear of idol worship. Well, I mean, literally, the coins he handles on a daily basis are, by social religious codes, idols, because they have the face of a pagan god on it, Caesar, who called himself a deity. So somewhere along the way, he has felt a conviction, though. We don't get the details, and honestly, we don't need them. We see the truly important thing, and that's this guy's humility. Now, it goes on to say that he pounds his chest with a simple, authentic prayer. God, atone for me, a sinner. Well, that's an interesting prayer. Some translations say, have mercy on me, but the Greek word is not the typical word for mercy. So I got to thinking to myself, what's going on here? Now, the Greek word for here, translated mercy, is to propitiate or atone. I know, big words. But we can read a whole bunch of modern Christian theology into this and miss something. Jesus is traveling to the temple in Jerusalem for the Passover celebration, the Day of Atonement. Okay, all Hebrew males must go and offer a sacrifice to atone for their family for one whole year. Can you see where this is going? This tax collector has shamed his family, probably been shunned or disowned by his family too. So my question is, who's going to offer up a sheep for him during Passover? Nobody. No one. He can't do it. He's not allowed because he's unclean and cannot enter deeper into the temple. He stays far off, pleading with God, who is literally physically distant, because he can't go further into the temple. He has to stay on the outskirts of it. So he stays back there and pleads with a God who is out of reach. And Jesus is essentially dismantling the religious system that they constructed that kept people distant from God. The book of Acts will be the application of this way to God socially, and the evolution of the religious mindset to the inclusions of those who we thought were just unclean and unable and unworthy. But we humans forget that. And then we rebuild obstacle courses on the way of Christ to see who's really serious about this. And it makes those who can compete in obstacle courses feel really good about themselves. But it makes them feel really good about themselves at the expense of those who can't do those. And the message of Luke is clear. Remove the obstacles. They only build pride. That's rough. Thomas Merton said another thing. I know I'm quoting Thomas Merton a lot, but he's my homeboy. He said, the mission of Christian humility in social life is not merely to edify, but to keep minds open to many alternatives. The rigidity of a certain type of Christian thought has seriously impaired this capacity, which nonviolence must recover. So my questions that I don't have answers for yet: can we recover a nonviolent way of holding belief and expressing belief? Can we value our faith as if it were a cozy cabin in a vast mystery of reality, without locking the doors of that cabin and pretending it is the whole of reality? Can we be humble and loving and curious? Well, I think we can. It's way easier than pride, and the freedom it allows is absolutely worth it and essential. Hey, thank you for joining me on my couch in my office today. Let me be a little cozy and warm. There's outside. You see the outside? It's all beautiful leaves and things out there. It's really glorious and party. Yeah, okay, I'm back now. But this concludes our Relentless Grace series for October. Next week is going to be our, what is the next week? I'm trying to remember. All Saints Day. November 1st is All Saints Day, so next Sunday is an All Saints Sunday that we are going to remember and have a service for those who have passed on. Now, if you found some hope, help, and healing from today's service, you can partner with us in a couple ways. Just follow us on all the social medias and things like YouTube and Instagram and Facebook, and I don't think we're anywhere else, but those three would work. And if you want to give financially to help us out and to make sure these things keep happening, there's a little link on the bottom of your screen here. You just type it into your searchy bar up there. It takes you to a place you can do one time or recurring, and we appreciate anything that you would want to send our way. So peace out, and we'll see you next week for All Saints Day. There, okay. Okay. Ooh. Couch is bouncy. That was built, that allowed in, that we built, allowing, oh, okay. Something. Elbow.